From the Oklahoma State Capitol, Dave Morris alongside Ben Felder from the Oklahoman on a day where thousands of people, teachers, support staff, converged to rally outside the Capitol. Ben, when I last left you, we were outside. It's much more comfortable in here.
Yeah, it was a cold day. Temperatures just above freezing. I have extra layers on today, so now I'm a little warm as we've transitioned into the Capitol. But,
I'm the same way. I have too many layers on at this point. I feel a little bit ridiculous and slightly underdressed for being in the rotunda, fourth floor of the state Capitol. Schools shut down across the state. Teachers rallied out here today. They were expecting around 30,000. Maybe those were lofty numbers, maybe not. Have you heard an official estimate?
I have not heard any count. In fact, in the press room earlier today, a lot of us were kind of debating on what we thought. But this was a large rally, and for a building that's used to seeing rallies, this was on the larger side, if not the largest that we've seen, at least in the last several years.
Well, let's talk some business here. Ben Felder with the Oklahoman, among the reporters the Oklahoman has covering this story across the board today. Be sure to go to newsok.com for a complete recap and upcoming editions, including Tuesday's editions of the Oklahoman. What did you hear today? What did we learn?
Yeah, well, teachers out in full force, and I think I mentioned this earlier this morning, and it stayed true, that I don't know that I heard one teacher talk about teacher pay. And that gets a lot of attention, teacher pay, for good reason. Up until the legislature recently acted on that last week, Oklahoma had last, or at least second to last, average teacher salaries in the nation, and it had been an issue, and educators had lobbied for higher pay, and we've seen a lot of efforts on that. Well, the legislature last week approved that pay raise that's going to look at about $6,000 on average for teachers across the state. But teachers still came out today saying that it wasn't not that it wasn't about pay, that they were glad that kind of mark had been checked, at least somewhat, but they were focused on public school funding, the funding that goes into classroom resources, goes into textbooks. We did see a little bit more money pumped into textbooks this last week, but going into new technology and new furniture. I mean, I had a teacher that told me, that said, I have nothing new in my classroom. I don't have a single textbook. I have no computers in my classroom. My desks are wobbly. There's holes in the ceiling. We just don't have the money to put into just basic repairs and basic resources, let alone a lot of the extracurricular activities like music and art that we once used to be able to provide. So resounding today, the message was, or the focus was, public education funding. And I think that's, we thought that might be the case, and everyone was pretty much on message on that today.
The rally this morning, we heard Alicia Priest from the Oklahoma Educators Association was among those who spoke. You can watch videos of each of the speakers online at newsok.com. There was probably 8 to 10 of those. They brought in national speakers, some from the National Educators Association, some from West Virginia, all coming in to lend their support and their voices.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this morning, but this is a national story right now. I mean, we see what's going on in Kentucky today as well, talk about what could happen in Arizona. But right now, in a lot of ways, the eyes of the nation in some ways are on Oklahoma. And a lot of people were interested in what was this walkout going to look like today, and what's it going to look like moving forward, and we'll get into that in just a moment. But yeah, I mean, Oklahoma has seen a decade of turmoil in its public education system in a variety of ways, and mainly through funding. Public education funding has been cut at some of the largest, if not the largest rates in the nation, at least when you look at the per pupil spending. So the money that follows students to their schools, that's how schools get money, is the state funds the student. For every student they get that X amount of dollars. Well, that amount of dollars has been going down, and that's where those budget cuts are coming from. And so, yeah, a lot of attention on whether or not the legislature, after last week, doing quite a bit in the sense that we've not seen this legislature approve taxes. So a $400 million plus tax package to fund a teacher pay raise, to do some school funding, that was a pretty big deal. And I think a lot of people acknowledged it was a pretty big deal. But now they're being asked to do more, and it remains to be seen if the legislature has any more political will to do that.
So when I left was around noon today. At that point, the rally was, hey, let's circle the Capitol, let our voices be heard, go in and speak to the legislatures. What happened here this afternoon?
Well, outside was the rally, but inside you saw teachers trying to talk and speak face-to-face with their legislators. And I was walking through the halls in the Senate and the House, and there were some legislators who had an open office. Some actually had donuts and coffee, were inviting people in. Some kind of do what you see where they put a sign on the door that says, hey, I support public funding or public school funding, so kind of, no need to knock. And there were some that were absent. I talked to one teacher from Tecumseh who said that she had a chance to talk to lawmakers, and I said, did you come away more optimistic or more discouraged? And she said, I came away more frustrated, because every time I talked to a lawmaker, they said, I support public education. I support the idea of putting more money into the classroom. But she said when the rubber meets the road, she hasn't seen that. And that she said a lot of lawmakers were kind of blaming it on other lawmakers and saying, well, you really need to talk to them. And in a lot of ways, that's true. I mean, there is, with the way that the legislature is set up and the need for a 3/4 majority to vote for a tax increase, a handful of lawmakers can really hold up the process. But a lot of teachers said that they were really frustrated. And during the session of the House today, teachers filled the gallery. I mean, it was packed as they were looking down at the House. Now, the legislature didn't take any action on public school funding. I don't think we necessarily expected it. At one point, there was an effort by a Democratic member to put some issues on the floor, and not a trick, but in a procedure that he even probably thought that it wasn't going to work, and it didn't. But you saw a roar of applause from the gallery, recognizing what was going on here. And so I think teachers came determined and frustrated. I think they left determined and frustrated, and a lot of them said they'll be back tomorrow.
Which is the perfect segue to, this was Monday. What happens Tuesday?
Well, that's the big question. Almost 200 schools across the state were closed today. That's according to the Oklahoma Education Association. Don't have an official count on tomorrow, but we do know that a lot of the bigger districts have already said that they're going to close. Oklahoma City, Edmond, Tulsa, Owasso, I believe Broken Arrow, a lot of the big school districts. And combined, even though they may not represent most of the school districts in terms of number, they represent a pretty large size of the enrollment. Today, well over half of all students across Oklahoma were out of school because of the walkout. So the question is, how many schools are going to be closed tomorrow? We do think quite a bit, and there were a lot of teachers from all corners of the state that told me that they'd actually got a hotel room for the night, so they're staying. And then the second question is going to be, what does the crowd here look like tomorrow? Because this is really, it's one thing to be closed. That does put pressure on lawmakers in terms of what that pressure looks like in their local communities, but the pressure also comes here in the Capitol, and for teachers to continue to come back. And so a lot of teachers I talked to said, I'm going to be here as long as it takes. One teacher had a tent. She was told she couldn't stay overnight, but she said she'll pack the tent down, she'll bring it back in the morning. But the big question is, what kind of size are we going to see tomorrow? In fact, we're still waiting to hear from the OEA about whether or not they're still going to set up the stage and have some speakers. A lot of the booths that were set up here in the Rotunda have told me that they think they're going to be open again tomorrow. So I would expect a large crowd here at the Capitol. We may not see that great mass of people outside the Capitol like we saw today, but I expect inside the Capitol to still be pretty full, and teachers are going to still be eager to talk to their legislative leaders.
He's Ben Felder with the Oklahoman. I'm Dave Morris. I'll get you out of here on this. I mentioned earlier in this interview that we had various reporters across the board covering various stories. You can find some of the stories we've already produced on newsok.com, including some videos of various people who are helping out students with food needs. Kind of recap, you've spoken with your colleagues. What have they covered and who have they spoken with?
Well, some of them were out at different feeding sites across town. Like we said, Oklahoma City, where a lot of students rely on that free breakfast and free lunch. The district still wanted to be able to provide that, so they had some feeding sites set up around town. Meg Wingeter, who's on the DIG team, was at some of those sites. David Dishman from the business desk was at the Science Museum and the zoo, where they were offering some special activities. You heard a little bit of frustration from some parents. Meg sent over a quote from a parent that said, she was dropping off her 3 boys at the Boys and Girls Club, and said that, I had to be late for work today because they didn't open up in time for me. I'm used to getting my kids out the door earlier, and I had to wait longer. And she said, I understand what the teachers are wanting, and I'm sympathetic, but at the same time, this is kind of a hassle. And so I expect that's the case, that's how a lot of parents feel. There are a lot of parents here today too, and a lot of parents on social media who have said, yes, it's a challenge having to have your kids out of school. It's also a challenge sending them to schools that we believe are not funded adequately. So it's kind of across the board in terms of opinion, but this does have a major impact. I mean, anytime school closes, we always think of like weather events when there's snow days. I know the city's always eager to know if the district's going to close, because you're talking about a lot of employees, you're talking about the movement of buses, you're talking about students, and so it definitely has an impact on communities, big and small, when school is out. And I think parents of of all types are kind of dealing with that, and as always, it kind of depends on what resources you have and what kind of means you have to be able to provide that child care.
It's a story that will continue to unfold throughout the week, and you're right, it has various business aspects.
Yeah.
You, me, and Tim Money were chatting beforehand about the buses, who pays for all that, and the gas, and Uber. How's their business going? Because shuttling this amount of people from various sites, there's costs involved with that as well.
Yeah.
All right, he's Ben Feller. More coverage from Ben can be found on social media in the Oklahoman and on newsok.com. We'll have more videos online as well. Ben, good job today.
Thanks. Yeah, it was definitely one of the more interesting days up here in the Capitol, and we'll do it again tomorrow.
Yes, we will. All of our colleagues will have continuing coverage online at newsok.com and in the Oklahoman.